Commentary will start playing automatically after the beep. Use the button on the left to turn the volume down, and the button on the right to turn it up. Use the middle button to pause and restart commentary. These buttons sometimes function as A, B and C options. We kindly request that visitors leave their coats and bags in the cloakroom before starting. You'll find it in the basement under the cupboard in the courtyard. This is also where you'll find the toilets. To listen to the instructions again, press A.
Men hebt de naam gegeven die het voortaan zal dragen. Ik heb daarvoor de naam bestemd van twee onze grootste zeehelden, namelijk de admiraal Strong. This wooden three-master, 150 feet long and with 32 cannons, is a full-size replica of the East Indiaman Amsterdam. In the 18th century, cargo ships like these, the biggest of their kind, carried merchandise between Asia and Europe. In 1749, the Amsterdam left the island of Texel bound for Batavia on its maiden sea voyage. There was a crew of 203 on board, along with 127 soldiers and 5 passengers. However, a severe storm in the English Channel wrecked the ship off the south coast of England, where a large part of the hull still remains. Archaeologists have raised items left on board the ship, some of which are now in the National Maritime Museum's collection. This reconstruction was made between 1985 and 1990 in Amsterdam. Blueprints for a similar ship from the museum's collection were used for the design, along with an 18th century model ship from the Rijksmuseum's collection. If you would like to hear more about the history of the Dutch East India Company, press A. As the story of the Amsterdam shows, sea voyages were not without risks. In order to spread the high risk and high cost of individual sea voyages, money was collected in 1602 for a major new venture called the United East India Company, now known today as the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, the abbreviation of its Dutch name. In just a short time, over 1,000 people subscribed as shareholders. Everyone wanted in on the act, from rich merchants to housekeepers. More than 3.5 million guilders was collected. Shares were already being sold on before the first ship had even left port under the East India Company flag. This signalled the birth of the world's first multinational with listed shares. During the 17th century, the East India Company grew to become a global trading network with its own fortresses, warehouses and offices. It was also the only company in the Dutch Republic allowed to do business with Asia. The company also made a lot of money from the trade between different Asian countries. The backdrop to the founding of the East India Company, followed barely 20 years later by the Dutch West India Company, was the war the Netherlands were fighting at the time against Spain. The East India Company ships attacked many Spanish and Portuguese vessels and Spanish and Portuguese trading posts in Africa and Asia. Once the enemy was beaten, the East India Company took control of their trade and the local population. Consequently, Dutch investors in the company also made profits from warfare.
C'est rassurant de savoir qu'il est la pièce du film.
highlights the historic link between the Netherlands and the sea. It showcases 50 objects, including some of the most prized items from the museum's collection from the 17th and 18th century, when the Netherlands was a republic. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Dutch cities prospered. Amsterdam expanded to become a port city with connections throughout the world. While the nobility and the church held sway elsewhere in Europe, in the Low Countries, merchants were pulling the strings. Their trade networks reached every corner of the globe and led to rising prosperity levels. From shipwrights to brewers, almost everyone here worked directly or indirectly for the shipping industry. That applied to the admiralties too, whose warships had to protect merchant vessels on their trade routes. This painting shows the anchoring place of ships in Batavia, modern-day Jakarta in Indonesia, during the mid-17th century. The Dutch East India Company, known at home as the VOC, an abbreviation of its Dutch name, founded a settlement here in 1619, after destroying the Javan city of Jakarta, to serve as the hub of its Asian trading network. Goods were brought here from all over Asia by various ocean routes, and were then sent to the Republic 3 times a year with a returning fleet. On the left-hand side of the painting, we can see the access to the port, the fortified walls, and a Dutch church in the background. At the centre of the canvas, a large VOC merchant navy vessel is at anchor. The painter had never visited Batavia himself, which we can tell, for example, from the small Chinese compass on the left-hand side. The Low Countries struggled for 80 years, between 1568 and 1648, to free themselves from the rule of their king, Philip II of Spain. This painting by Cornelis van Wieringen depicts a major maritime victory by the Dutch over the Spanish, which took place halfway through the 80 Years' War, or Dutch Revolt as it's also known. The Spanish fleet, lying at anchor in the Bay of Gibraltar, was taken completely by surprise by a Dutch attack. We can see cannonballs being fired, plumes of smoke filling the horizon, vessels being sunk, and drowning sailors fighting for their lives. On the right-hand side of the canvas, you can see the iconic Rock of Gibraltar. The Spanish fleet was defeated, and the battle led to peace negotiations with Spain and a ceasefire that lasted 12 and a half years. Portraits of husband and wife Isaac Sveers on Constantia Bloemacht are a prime example of the rich burgher class in the Dutch Republic. Isaac is wearing a sash decorated with gold and silver threads. His left hand is resting on his sword, and in his right he is holding a pistol. Constantia's silk dress is decorated with expensive lace. Around her neck and wrist are pearls, and she's wearing pearl earrings. Reflected in the iron gorget worn by Isaac, there's a nice touch. A self-portrait of the painter, Luttikhaus. Isaac led a turbulent life before he married Constantia. He was orphaned at a young age and roamed throughout Europe and Brazil. He finally made a career for himself at the Admiralty of Amsterdam, rising to the position of Vice Admiral. Little has been written about the women of the past, so it's something. This is a portrait of the most famous Dutch admiral of the 17th century, Michiel de Ruyter. He is shown here as the supreme commander of the Dutch war fleet, the baton in his hand representing his authority. The red flag bears his family crest, and in the bottom right, his flagship, de Zeven Provinciën, the 7 provinces, can be seen in a naval battle. For a trading nation such as the Dutch Republic, it was extremely important to provide military protection for its merchant navy vessels while at sea. Both the merchandise and the trading routes needed to be protected. De Ruyter led the Dutch war fleet at sea for many years. He had a good deal of military success, and was both famed and feared far beyond the Republic. The prestigious Order of the Knights of St. Michael sits proudly on his chest. He received it from the French king for his victories over the English. De Ruyter has been viewed for centuries in the Netherlands as a national hero. someone who people like to model themselves on, particularly when times are hard. But nowadays, his hero status is being questioned. For in his capacity as admiral, he carried out orders that, in practice, enabled the continuation of the Dutch slave trade in West Africa. Your audio player for a moment and take a good look at this exceptional sculpture in detail. What exactly are we looking at here? This porcelain figure of an African man was commissioned by a European and made in China. This figurine reveals all kinds of European and Chinese assumptions about people from unfamiliar cultures. The red lips, wide eyes and scanty clothing are racist depictions commonly used in Europe and Asia to represent people of African origin. The golden earrings and the slave collar, as it's known, around the neck are unmistakable references to the European slave trade. The figure also has clear Chinese characteristics that reference Buddha, such as the hairstyle, the extended earlobes, and the lotus leaf he's standing on. The star on his forehead can be seen as Buddha's third eye, but it's also a reference to the African continent. The combination of European and Asian forms and ideas is typical of the art made for export in China at that time. To us, the statuette represents the exchange of ideas and visual imagery, as well as the stereotypical views and preconceptions of other cultures that were in circulation at that time. 300 years later, these themes remain current. subject of this portrait first found fame as a junior officer in the Battle of Dogger Bank against England in 1781. Although the battle was indecisive, it was celebrated in the Netherlands as a victory, and von Kinsbergen was given a hero's reception. Von Kinsbergen had a varied career that began in the army and progressed via the Admiralty of Amsterdam to a position in the Russian Navy. Once back in the Republic, he pleaded the case for reform of the Dutch fleet, and as an advisor to the Stadtholder, the de facto head of state in the Republic, he was able to push through a number of smaller changes. Von Kinsbergen was later named Count of Dogger Bank. Here we see the port of Vlissingen in the year 1805. In the foreground, on the left-hand side, the commander of the fleet, Verheul, is accompanied by a number of naval officers. There are dozens of small vessels in the harbour. A striking detail is that the flag raised on the mast of the warship in front of the church is not the Dutch flag, but the French tricolour. At the end of the 18th century, the Dutch Republic had gone into decline. In 1795, it began to fall into French hands, and the Batavian Republic was proclaimed as a sort of puppet state of France. About 10 years later, the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte asked his ally, the Netherlands, to help him with his plans to invade Great Britain.
En jij moet zoeken.
Om een mooie slanke taille te krijgen. Dat wordt zo'n 6. Ik beweeg mee als je ademt. Maar het blijft net zo goed om hard heen. Ach ja. Parapluutje, parasolletje. Het leven is geen onderschat. Daar zijn mijn grootmoeder altijd. Trouwens, een goede paraplu heeft ook wel visballijnen. Ballijn. Komt uit het Frans, wist je dat?
Liefdesklee.
Je kan me goed voorstellen dat als je al jarenlang een woning zoekt in Amsterdam, je ziet dat er nieuwe woningen worden gebouwd in ons aan de rand van zo'n industriegebied of zelfs in het industriegebied, dat je dan toch wel hoog bent en zo'n woning kiest. En na een aantal maanden is het
determined by maps that were centuries old and in which large parts of the world were missing. Sea voyages produced new information and, little by little, all the pieces of the puzzle that was the Earth's surface fell into place. As the Dutch built up their international trade network, they increasingly contributed more pieces to the puzzle. The mapmakers of Amsterdam acquired an international reputation. When projecting the curved surfaces of the Earth onto a flat plane, choices have to be made. Which continent should the map of the world be centred on? What goes at the top and what goes at the bottom? What appears to the left and what to the right? Amsterdam mapmakers used the projection invented by the Flemish cartographer Gerard Mercator, in which Europe is relatively large and positioned centrally on the map. Even today, the Mercator projection is the most common. The map of the world hanging on the wall here is an example of what is known as the Gaulle-Peters projection, developed in order to represent the land areas of the various continents in correct proportion. It's immediately clear that this map creates a very different image of the world. This book contains two petitions, from the Brazilian Antonio Parupeba. In these petitions, Parupeba asks the Dutch government for support for his people, the Potiguars, who came from the Ceará region of northeastern Brazil. The Potiguars were now back under Portuguese rule. Parupeba had worked for the West India Company in the former colony of Dutch Brazil as a representative and military leader. Antonio Parupeba is one of the few Brazilians from this time whose name we still know. He travelled to the Dutch Republic 3 times, which is where he learned to read and write Dutch. In contrast to the Portuguese, the Dutch had not enslaved the Potiguars, instead making them allies in the fight against their common enemy, Portugal. Compared to life under the Portuguese, the Potiguars enjoyed a certain degree of independence under Dutch rule. In 1654, after 25 years as a Dutch colony, the Portuguese had reconquered the territories of the east coast of Brazil. The Potiguars feared reprisals from the Portuguese because they had supported the Dutch for so long. Facing this new and dangerous situation, at the centre of this town plan of Cape Town, we can see the Company's Town. In other words, the gardens of the Dutch East India Company. These gardens were initially created to provide fresh food for the crews of the East India Company halfway through their voyage to Asia. But the climate of the Cape turned out to be so suitable for growing vegetables and fruit that the Company's Town soon acquired an international reputation. Ships from all corners of the earth brought new varieties of fruits and vegetables, such as cucumbers from India, bananas from South Asia, tea from Japan, and watermelons from Brazil. A garden with medicinal plants was also added. The East India Company's gardens became famous, both for the range of plants and their breathtaking location at the foot of Table Mountain. The food-producing role of the gardens was gradually taken over by farming ventures in the Cape and its surrounding areas. Farmers from the Dutch Republic established themselves on the Cape and laid claim to ever-expanding amounts of land. This increasingly restricted the freedom of movement of the local population, the nomadic Khoi. These instructions are one of the most important documents in the history of Australia. They led, indirectly, to the discovery of the continent by Dutch captains working for the East India Company in the 17th century. These captains succeeded in mapping out the entire west coast and parts of the south coast of Australia for the first time. On their way to Asia, East Indiamen had previously sailed from South Africa along the coasts of Africa and India towards Java in Indonesia. The instructions in this document state that skippers should no longer head northwards once they'd passed southern Africa, but must continue to sail 4,000 nautical miles eastwards, straight across the Indian Ocean. Only then should the ship start heading north. It's difficult for us to imagine now, but in the 16th and 17th centuries, most of the objects in this room were completely new to Dutch people. Voyages to distant lands brought Europeans into contact for the first time with exotic nature and the then unfamiliar cultures of other continents. Well-to-do merchants and governors kept what were known as cabinets of curiosities, containing a multiplicity of unusual and striking objects, such as seashells from Ambon, porcelain from China, a whale tooth from the Arctic, lacquerware from Japan, and swords from India. The Cabinet of Curiosities was a kind of museum before these were established, and the objects were conversation pieces that stimulated the imagination and enabled the host to make a good impression. The term curiosity was a reference to items that were exceptional or rare, rather than the human sense of inquisitiveness. The combination of objects was intended to represent the whole world, and, along with globes depicting the earth and the heavens, bring the world and the universe quite literally within reach.
Since 11/27. I should have stayed so long in that depot. It was hard for me to do it. And it was like other things they're doing.
Ja.
Look, they've given you a stool. Sit down.
The Netherlands has a rich tradition of sailing for pleasure. From the second half of the 16th century onwards, rich merchants and governors bought elegantly ornamented yachts for business meetings, visits to markets, and for trade. They were also for enjoying themselves on the water with their families during their leisure time. What visitors most often notice about the old model ships are the two outriggers. Because Dutch waters are often fairly shallow, inland water vessels here often don't have a keel, but are instead rounded or flat on the underside. To compensate for the lack of a keel, vessels were given two outriggers. This prevents the vessels from deviating too far from their course when there is a side wind. One of these outriggers would be lowered at any given time on the opposite side to the direction that the wind was coming from. In nautical terms, that's the leeward side. A number of model yachts are exhibited here, ranging from the traditional to the ultra-modern. Many of the traditional types of boats can still be seen sailing around the Dutch inland waters. Greeks did it, the Romans did it, and so did the Vikings, each decorating their ships with carvings, paintings, and sculptures that are full of symbolism, and the Dutch did likewise. The ship's ornaments in this room have been set up to give a good picture of the various types of decoration that could be seen on board from stem to stern. The most familiar ship's ornament is the figurehead on the prow, the very front of the vessel. Dutch ships often proudly displayed a lion for this purpose, but biblical Greek or Roman mythological figures were also often used. The figurehead on warships was above all meant to scare your opponents. The ship's name was often displayed on an escutcheon, a plate on the ship's stern. The wood carving varies on both smaller and larger ships, from simple folksy artwork to high-quality sculptures produced by professional sculptors and woodcarvers.
Humans at Sea. I'm Eli Thorne. I'll be Wijnand Stomp's translated voice in this audio guide. Wijnand is a theatre maker and storyteller who presents the Dutch version of the guide. The tour lasts around 30 minutes and it takes in the whole exhibition. And we'll be meeting all kinds of seafaring people, each with their own story and their own reason for going to sea. For some, it's about freedom, development, dreams and ambitions, and for others, it's order and rhythm, or maybe even crisis and captivity. Every picture tells a story, and in this audio guide, we'll be getting to know some of the people who are sharing their story with us. Some of them are alive today and can tell their stories themselves. Others are voices from the past. They may no longer be with us, but their story has been preserved for posterity. Their stories are told by relatives or descendants. Besides these personal stories, this audio guide also includes extracts of conversations with photographers and finds out what the sea means to them. You can listen to these interviews wherever you see a camera icon on a transmitter. The sea also played a role in Wijnand's life. He was just a few weeks old when the passenger ship Prins der Nederlanden brought him from Curaçao to the Netherlands. So, let's get started. Turn left to enter the exhibition, and we'll meet again in the next room. At the start of the exhibition, surrounded by photos taken by Misha Kaiser. Now, Wijnand spoke with Misha about what the sea means to him, and these photos give a sense of his fascination with the sea. It's as if the rougher the weather, the more he's captivated. In some of his photos, the sea looks ferocious. Now, I'm here with Gronya. Hello, Gronya.
Hello.
Who was present at the interview that Wijnand had with Misha. Gronya, it looks like Misha is in the middle of the sea when he's taking these photos. It looks like the waves are almost tumbling over him.
Yes, he said sometimes a wave crashes over him when he's out there taking photos. And there are times that he's thought, oh, perhaps I shouldn't have done that. Like on photo number 29. The weather was really nasty that day. It was hailing and it was midwinter. And mijn naam is Tetske van Ossewaarde. De foto's in de vitrine zijn... I'm Tetke van Ossewaarde. The photos in this showcase were taken by my uncle Janus Ossewaarde. Janus was my father's older brother. My father was the youngest in the family, and when their parents died, my father was still only 12, so Uncle Janus became his guardian, and my father lived in his house in Amsterdam. Since Uncle Janus and his wife Fien had no children of their own, we were like grandchildren to them. We remained close right up to his death. My uncle had kept a diary while on board the SS Nickerie. I'll read a few extracts. On the 11th of January, we left the roadstead at Newport News with a shipment of coal bound for Boston. A light breeze was blowing, but it was bitterly cold. The thermometer read 10 degrees below zero. Huge ice floes drifted down the river, knocking against the hull every now and then. The next day, the telegraph officer received a wireless weather report. It said the following.
Mijn naam is Ellie Piek. Ik ben door het Scheepvaartmuseum uitgenodigd om deel te nemen aan...
I'm Ellie Peek. The National Maritime Museum invited me to take part in this exhibition by showing a portrait to illustrate women under sail. I was one of the first women to sail with the Dutch Navy in 1980. In 1979, we were given a chance to apply to take part in an amazing challenge. In those days, only men sailed in the Navy. This was the chance to do something different. There were 200 people on board back then, and we were just 12 women, later 20. We were definitely in the minority. Men on board
Here we've arrived at Henk Wildschut's series of photos entitled Man at Sea. Henk had quite a romantic vision of the sea until he joined the Bavarian container ship, the Harriet. Gronja is here with me again. Hello, Gronja.
Hello, Eli.
So you were there with Henk as well. Tell us what he said it was like crossing the ocean on a ship like that.
Well, Henk said there's not much to tell. It was dull, actually. He was pretty much alone, and it was difficult.
Oh, why was it difficult? You mean being alone, nothing happening?
Yes, there was no motivation, and Henk found himself without any inspiration. And that's what Henk's work is all about. Things constantly changing, things that he can respond to. Getting an insight into what's going on. Henk is someone who's always following the news and media, and suddenly he was in a world that was totally closed off from everything for as long as the voyage lasted. Internet? He had no connection. He had no access to news. There was no radio. They only had telex. Tuning into the radio at sea, that's impossible. You need a satellite connection, and he didn't have that. So Henk said it was like being in prison.
Oh dear, so it wasn't the romantic life that he'd envisaged, the sailor's life?
No.
What about that romantic image then?
Absolutely, that's what he had imagined when he joined the ship. Henk's not naive. He knew what to expect, but he still had that romantic sense of being on board a ship. Yes, so for Henk, that was a bit of a disappointment. There wasn't anything romantic about it at all. It was as unromantic as you could imagine. Those guys, they just sat there. They work, then they go to their cabin, and then they get up and go back to work. And Henk, well, he explored that ship from top to bottom. Every screw, every corner. But within a couple of days, he had seen it all.
Okay. So, did he think that the men were as good as he was?
Yes, absolutely. He had lots of conversations about it with them. He was a kind of entertaining diversion because he did all kinds of fun stuff with them.
Okay, so it's not just him holding up a mirror to show how dull their life was.
Oh, no, because he was a part of it. So he began thinking up silly things to do. Well, for example, like that photo of the man with the anchor.
En ik ben door het Scheepvaartmuseum gevraagd.
I'm Marianne Moustaki. The National Maritime Museum asked me to read an extract from Mrs. Marto Sentico's memoir. I was born in 1903 in Karang Salam Desa in Banyumas, Central Java. My parents had 3 children, 2 boys and me. I was 11 when my parents first tried to arrange a marriage. I refused. The man I was supposed to marry was my cousin. Already died. The other had just been circumcised. I took a job on a rubber plantation, making incisions in the rubber trees. When I turned 21, I still wasn't married. I heard from people that they were looking for workers to go to Suriname. I went to the depot at Purwaketo and registered with the work.
Plaatjes.
Wat voor plaat?
Briefjes.
Het reizenpas.
Ja, naar Mekka. De moslims. Die gaan naar Mekka.
Wat?
Waarschijnlijk heb je zo'n ding nodig voordat je op reis mag.
Eenmaal zou iedere gezonde volwassen moslim de pelgrimstop naar Mekka moeten maken. Dan zie je.
Wie zijn die?
Dus die mensen gingen naar zo'n tocht toe.
Die en die? Ja, die en die.
Dat is er zin in, denk ik.
Maar ik weet het nog niet.
Ze mij wel gewoon overheen.
Alle menselijke het gaat alleen om de zee.
Ik zag 2 ogen.
Hallo.
Daarachter.
Moet je kan opsteken.
Nee.
Ik denk dat er een zeemol staat.
Is an endless wave gets a beauty. And it ain't safe.
Years ago, Reinhard used to sing that song with his band. He's bound up with his